Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you especially to Teru for taking the initiative to this event, and also very much thank you to the Japanese and French organizers who made this all possible, and not least the sponsors, of course. So I'm very happy to be here, and all of a sudden we're already at the 60-year mark, which is kind of frightening, but also exciting in a way. My talk will not feature a lot of hardcore science per se. I will give you a few highlights, but I'm happy to discuss, of course, with you anything during the break. And I'm also very sure from looking at the program that we will see a lot of good hardcore science from younger scientists and from eminent scientists from France later today. So how did we get here? This is where things kind of started. This is how I looked in 1992 together with my PhD supervisor, Thomas Welch. And this is basically 2 days ago. And yes, I have become a little bigger, I have become a little grayer, but maybe I have also become a little wiser, at least one can hope. So this is the development, and all of a sudden it has happened and the years have gone by. What I didn't realize is that, so for us Europeans, for me, I can say 60 years is, of course, is a big number, and normally you celebrate it in some way. But in the East Asian culture, it's a different thing altogether. There's a concept called KANREKI. Aware of in my Western ignorance, until a few weeks ago when a former Japanese guest scientist talked to me, discussed it with me. And actually, KANREKI is, for those of you who know, it's why I have a red shirt on. And I'm trying not to do cultural appropriation here, but this is my tribute to KANREKI, which basically is the 60-year celebration in Eastern Asian societies. And it has, of course, to do with the zodiac, the Asian zodiac, with all the animals. And we're again in the year of the dragon, and we're all born in the year of the dragon. And I think if you go around 5 times, which equals 60, then everything is aligned again because there's some species of dragons, and I don't know all the details. Again, I might be doing cultural appropriation here, but what I like about this concept, as far as I understand it, is that it's about rebirth. You start a new life, basically. So you're going around 5 times the circle, and now you're starting a new life. And it's time for reflection, and I like that also, because why not actually sit down and actually look back. That's partly what I'm doing here in this talk. That's partly what we're doing here today. But of course, looking forward is much more, rewarding at the end of the day. So again, not super much science as such, in detail at least, but I will give you hopefully an entertaining talk. And so the idea is that I've been working in science for 30 plus years. I'll show you a few highlights. I'll hopefully have a few funny anecdotes. They might be not funny for everyone, but let's see. There will be some name dropping, well, because why not? And hopefully not too much. And there will be some comments and perspectives from me, because if you want it or not, and you don't design it that way, or you don't do it deliberately, but somehow you turn into a grumpy old man who yells at the clouds for no apparent reason. It's kind of happening with age. With tongue-in-cheek, of course. So, in general, also, I wanted to say that this is a talk that's very difficult for me, in the sense that this is a talk about me, and I don't really like to be making anything about me all the time, but this one is kind of about me all the time. But it's a reflection, that's why it's about me, but hopefully through the reflection and some of my comments, I can give some inspiration to the younger generation especially also, and some of the older generation might start to nod and say, yeah, I can see that, I can also recognize that. Let's see. Okay, so before I start, I wanted to thank a few very important people that have sort of shaped my career in one way or another, and I'm thankful for that. So I wanted to start the name dropping and mention that my PhD supervisor, Thomas Welch, who just filled 80 this year, of course, has a lot of impact on my career. And together with him, I could shape what I was becoming and what I was doing in the research. He comes from chromatography, and I made him aware of electrophoresis at that time, and he got interested, and we started working on that. Gyula Vig is a researcher from Texas A&M, now retired, originally from Hungary. He's a good friend of Thomas. He came and spent some time with us in our lab, showed me a lot of theory, but also, more importantly for my career, at a conference that we were attending, he introduced me to Mike Ramsey. And Mike and Steve, back then at Oak Ridge National Lab, now Mike is at UNC in Chapel Hill, and Stephen is at Indiana. They were basically my postdoc supervisors, so I had the great fortune to do a postdoc with them in 96 to 98 or so, I think. At that time, and then I also happened to meet Sebeth Laporte, who came and visited, and she basically introduced me back to the European scene, what was going on in terms of microfluidics back then in Europe, and she pointed me to some exciting groups and opportunities, and that's how I ended up in Denmark at a very new institute, or almost new institute, but a new effort in microfluidics at that point. And as I was in Denmark, I soon got introduced to the Swedes in the field, and Thomas and Johan, and that was very nice, and it has been over all the years been so nice. And one of the things that I especially thank them for is basically to introduce me to the Scandinavian way of thinking, the Scandinavian way of life, and the Scandinavian way of taking things not always too seriously. So thanks for that. And I certainly also wanted to thank my wife that she had to put up with me, and the life of an academic is not always easy to deal with. But very, very certainly also I wanted to thank a whole number of students, postdoc, collaboration partners, and so on over the years. All right, thanks out of the way. Let's get going with the science. So one of my first papers was the first paper, was on chromatography, just focus on the highlights. So it shows that my background is in chemistry. I'm an analytical chemist. So that's why the molecules in the title comes from. Microfluidics is overarching, molecules because I'm a chemist, and I'm an analytical chemist in particular. So I worked on chromatography, and then later during my PhD, I started to work with flows already. And you could rightly say that whatever is in a capillary is a microflow, and it kind of is. Especially I was looking here at some two types of flow and how the overlapping of or the superposition of those flows can influence performance of, in this case, a separation system. By the way, I did both my master thesis and my PhD at the University of Ulm in Germany. And of course, you guys should have seen and know, of course, that there's a Ruidul just a few blocks from here, where also the Institut Curie is, and so forth. And of course, that's it. As always, it's because of Napoleon, right? Because he had a battle close by there, and made sure that some of the borders in Germany look like they do now. Then I moved to the US and did a postdoc with Mike Ramsey and Stephen Jacobson, and there I worked. Basically, I started working with microfluidics. I learned about the microfluidic the fabrication of glass devices, and I used my knowledge from analytic chemistry and separations and brought it basically to their lab. And in this case, you see some examples where we work with gradient elution, meaning programmed solvents that can change composition over time. And that's fairly easily done on a microfluidic chips, one of the many advantages of microfluidics. Now, back in those days, you needed to print out your paper when you wanted to submit it, and you had put it in an envelope and actually send it into the editorial office, and a few months later you might get either a printout of comments back or sometimes even handwritten notes back. Now, the first paper went through without too much problems, even though I made a mistake, which I should have caught, which is I talked about plate numbers, which is a figure of merit of the quality of the separation. But when you do gradients, that concept becomes a little iffy. You shouldn't talk about plate numbers in gradients, but I did. The second one ended up with a very eminent older Dutch separation scientist, and he was not even shy to put his name on his comments, saying, "Yeah, you cannot do that." And he gave me a real good, stern reprimand, basically, back in the days. And as a younger scientist, that kind of, okay, yes, maybe I have to be more careful and less cocky about, even though the results were very nice. And then, after I had met Sylvester Porte, I got a connection to Denmark, and I moved to Denmark. And I was fortunate there to meet people that had no microfluidics background, but they had microfabrication background, and they had micro-optical background and a little bit of MEMS background. So there were people there that had been working on making better solar cells, for example. And I was hooking up with them, and then we were starting to do optical detection elements and combine those with microfluidics. So especially waveguides, but later also photodiodes and other things that improved our possibilities for detecting in those small microfluidic devices. And yes, so there's always these conferences. So once you start to become, your own junior researcher and have results, you can go to conferences. And one of the conferences was the SPIE conference in Santa Clara in 2000, and Theroux mentioned that already. Yes, Holger Becker was one of the chairs. So at least we got our story straight. That's good. That's good. And I was on a paper here that was just a co-author, but then there was another guy that was Theroux, and that's how we met for the first time. It was very nice, I remember. And then I also had a paper of my own on the optical stuff. And yes, I think in the same session, Holger also talked, and he talked already about polymer microfluidics, which is some of the things that Holger had worked on. Yes, that was the first time that I met Theroux. So at this point, when you're starting as a young scientist, you start your career, you might think about some aspects of where you want to direct your career, or some philosophies, I would say, which maybe I didn't do, but subconsciously I probably did. So one thing is, of course, there's a lot of serendipity involved. You can be lucky to meet the right people at the right time and get introduced to them, and that can give you all of a sudden an impetus in a certain direction that you haven't seen before, that makes a collaboration possible, that opens up a new field for you. So clearly, serendipity is something. But you might also want to think about whether you feel yourself to be a person that is sort of a deep thinker on a very specific topic, where you want to dive really deep into that? Or do you see yourself somebody who is interested in a lot of different aspects, a lot of different things, because we are in a very cross-disciplinary field, right? And obviously, what I'm showing this is, I'm kind of the second guy, that's how it turned out. But then you might want to think about it, this kind of, this dichotomy of the universalist versus specialist. Is it nice? Well, I think it's nice to follow your curiosity as much as you can, if you can afford it, and explore many different aspects of science. Or is it strategically smarter, and that's a leading question, yes it is, to become a specialist? Unfortunately, I would say, that's just how science works these days. When you're a specialist, you make yourself known to be a specialist in that field. You get asked to become involved in certain projects because you're a specialist, and so on and so forth. Raising money typically gets easier. But I find it a little sad, and I kind of admire this guy. It's Alexander von Humboldt. He was one of those polymath. Of course, they cannot exist anymore these days. It's just not possible. The sheer amount of knowledge, but also the barriers that come from our system, from funding to being in a box, doing your stuff, and not looking too far outside. And I find that a bit sad. But this is the reflection part. This is part of the reflection part here from my side. I wish there were chances to be more like Humboldt still today. But anyway, it's something for younger scientists to at least think about. So when I look back, I think my early to mid career was the most exciting time. It sounds sad that I don't think now is the most exciting time, but I think back then it was such an exciting. The field was in so much development, and I had a great time, building stuff up and collaborating with people. It was really exciting because it was the early days of microfluidics, not as early as some other of my colleagues here, but still very early in the game, and that made it very exciting. And it was also exciting because people were coming in from all kind of different fields into microfluidics. There's pathways in from an engineering side, there's pathways in from a geophysicist kind of a way, and there's pathways in, like me, from a chemist point of view. And we had to meet, we had to start understanding each other, we had to start talking the same language, and that was very exciting. As we all know, it's a very cross-disciplinary and very fertile field, meaning that I continuously have to learn, and I appreciate that very much. So in the beginning, you could feel almost there was this kind of clash between engineers and chemists and physicists. Nowadays, it's much more mellow, and thankfully so. We have to collaborate, otherwise we cannot make these great results. But back then, it was kind of clashy. And one of the early conferences where it was very, very visible was the GRC conference, the Gordon Research Conference on, I think it's called Chemistry and Physics of Microfluidics. One of the first ones, well, I think this was the first one, was in Oxford in 2001. And I just have a few slides from the program, also because you can see, maybe you recognize all those names. These are almost all of them are sort of very well-known people in the field. You might have read their papers. But the funny thing is that engineers were excited about something that they think they discovered and wanted to implement something, and the chemists would say, well, actually, that's never going to work. Your electrolyte is much too concentrated. You'll never, that's going to work. I think, but Juan Santiago was trying to do, he was trying to get some stacking, but he had such high concentrations, the electrolyte would never work. But the chemists were not better, right? We were getting excited about seeing flows somewhere in our little microfluidic channels, and the engineers kind of looked up from their computers and said, yeah, well, we've done that in the 50s. Okay, all right. But for us chemists, it was kind of like seeing little twirls and eddy. We didn't even know what it's called. Eddy, vortex, twirl. We had to establish the language and learn it. Yes, so there was other people that you might or might not know. Holger Becker shows up again. And then me, what the heck was I thinking? So this is my problem with being interested in too many things and thinking I can do heck it everywhere. So I was giving a talk at a GRC on computational fluid dynamics and particle material symmetry. I have never been that nervous, I think. But it was a really good discussion at the end, which GRCs tend to be. So, Andreas, Tibet, I see more people here. All right. So moving on, a few more highlights. And I'll just show these just to show you basically, not to show off, but to show you how unfocused I was. And then you can take it as such, or you can think about, I don't want to do that, or you can think, oh, that sounds actually nice. You can see here in this slide, there's fabrication. And this paper actually still gets a lot of traction. It's quite old, but apparently people like it. Or it's very convenient to use as a reference. I think that's what it is. And then there's the other paper, which is kind of a more of a theoretical work, has a lot of equations in there. But I really like that work because it was a real intellectual work. Experimental work is also rewarding, but sitting down sometimes just with a pen and paper and some equations and trying to figure out stuff and then make experiments, of course, that was very rewarding too. Then sometimes you're lucky, there's different types of highlights. So in 2003 or 4, I think 4, Lab on a Chip, the journal, they were still running these kind of perspective articles, I would call them. And Andrew Kamholz, who came out of Paul Jaeger's group in the University of Washington, he wrote one that was called Proliferation of Microfluidics in Literature and Intellectual Property. So it came out, and he had collected all kinds of data. How he collected the data, I guess you can always question. But one of the tables that he had in there was most published microfluidic authors in 2003. And I was so glad to see my name with all these other big guys there. I don't know how I ended up on that one. It's because I think I used microfluidics as a keyword in my title. This cannot be the only explanation. Otherwise, why would I be with all these very esteemed colleagues here? But it makes your day. So I copied that, hung it up on my door so that the head of my institute could see it. He just said that. Little tricks. So, and then as your career progresses, you get invited even to plenaries, and that's a nice honor. So, because I'm in between the fields of pure microcast and also separations, I also gave talks at separation meetings. This is the microscale bioseparation meeting that was in Vancouver in 2007. And Bob Kennedy invited me to give a plenary. And that's cool, and you have to have a cool title for it, right? So microfabrication wouldn't cut it anymore, so it has to be nanofabrication approaches for improved separation. Which is good because you can put a lot of stuff in there, and you're also supposed as a plenary to give perspectives and to talk about more general things where you see things going. And so I had all the big guys sitting there and was very nervous, but I felt pretty solid about what I was saying. And I said a few things that are provocative. You have to do that sometimes. So we were talking about making these monolithic phases, so there are phases that are basically synthesized inside your column. And how to do that, the chemistry, I said, this is very hard to get a grip on. It sometimes resembles black magic. That's what I said. And the funny thing is, about a year and a half later, a paper came out of Aaron Wheeler's group, Gradient Dilution and Microchannel Electrochromatography, and one of the sentences was, a common criticism of the use of polymerization in phases is poor reproducibility. Indeed, some have likened those mediums to black magic. And there's the reference. You can't do those references anymore, I guess, nowadays. But I was like, okay. It appears sometimes people do listen to what you say, so be careful, and they even remember what you said. Yeah. I have 5 minutes, yes. Don't worry. These are just briefly look at the titles, because it's just showing that I was in East and West, as we say in Danish. I was all over the place. Because I got excited, but also because I had collaboration opportunities. And one good advice is always surround yourself with people that are much smarter than you, because that way you get good projects and you learn a lot from them. So you can see a few here. Patch clamp stuff, fibers, carbon nanotubes, all over the place. And then a few years back, we started to use thiolene as a polymer that is very nice to work with in terms of making chips, but also in terms of bringing functional elements onto the surfaces of these devices. And we have used them for enzyme reactors and other things. So, extraction devices. Yeah, I have to move on a little bit. So one of the most recent things is we use those devices also to isolate circular DNA from other types of DNA by using specific enzymes that either linearize large circles of DNA or chop the linear DNA into smaller pieces. All right, a few perspectives, yeah. The provocative statement is that I don't think it's quite as much fun anymore as it used to be. And why is that? Well, one of the reasons is that I'm older. I'm not as hungry anymore. I think I've done what I wanted to do mostly. I don't need to do so much more. And there's many, many more players in there, so it's more crowded. It is what it is, but that's just how I see it. The sense of pioneering is a little bit gone. And also this, Holger mentioned in his video that the promises that haven't been quite fulfilled yet also leaves a little bit of a funny taste. the funding landscape has changed. It's not necessarily that there's less funding, but it's so focused and it's so determined by the people who give the money. So, publication landscape is about to change. You might have noticed it, or peer review, I think, is almost broken, but that's a lot of provocative stuff now, so we can talk about that in the breaks if you want to. And then maybe we have been sleeping on our merits, and I mean some of the established groups, because there's a lot happening out of China, especially, extremely a lot. And so there's lots of papers coming out with good quality now, and we cannot just sleep on entitlement. That's not a good way to do it. Of course, there's still lots of amazing possibilities, and it's all up to the young generation to fulfill those or explore those potentials and do great science, and especially in personalized medicine and organ on a chip, and I think we'll see more of that today. But sometimes maybe when you feel stuck, maybe consider change your fields. It's a bold step, it's a hard step, but I didn't have the guts to do it. But I think Humboldt would have done it. So finally, and this is I'm wrapping up here, I think what is great about this is to have a community, and you establish over the years a community of colleagues and friends, and this rapport that you have is forged by mutual respect and common work. So, it's all fun and games sometimes, conferences with good food and colleagues, and hanging out with the big shots. It's all these opportunities that you have to take when they present themselves. But also hard work sometimes and still having fun, preparing a conference here. Some of the big guys in Japan who are learning about culture in Japan. I have to watch carefully how I do that. And then, more work that for preparing conferences. And Leroux is here in Thomas. And I don't remember when we met first aid, so it could have been around microtest conferences. I mean, the organization of them. And Jean-Louis, of course, is also there. And here, even Roland let me take the stage, and I don't know what you were thinking, and I don't know what I was saying, but I had the stage in Freiburg many years back. So, important, let's not make our job our own identity, our sole identity. I think there's more to it. We all have to watch out for ourselves, our health. And music is very important to me. This guy also thinks so I'm good. And he thinks that, if he hadn't been a scientist, he would have been a musician. I could have said the same, but I don't think. I'm not going to plague you with this because I don't have time anymore. You're lucky. But I started playing the bass 5 years ago, so it's never too late. Yep, no. So, my final words are these. It's important that, I think it's important, what I want to do in the future is to actually have to find the time and the leisure to dive into stuff that is not just microfluidics, that is not just what the funding bodies want me to do. Maybe I want to learn more about black holes, or the science of consciousness, or even This is a musical joke at the end there. I guess only musicians might get that. So maybe it's still possible to become a mini Humboldt. Who knows? With that, happy birthday to the birthday boys. Happy KANREKI. I guess you can say that. And thanks so much to everyone.